We now have 3 outcomes set up and working properly. Our next task in this tutorial is to create our 4th and final outcome, which in many ways actually is really 2 separate outcomes in one, as you'll see as things progress a little bit later on. The first thing we need to do then is to create the final 3 compares down here. So I'll just do that now, as per usual, leaving space between them for the remarks that I'll put in. Copy the remarks across once again, and this will be Bonnie and Clyde Bonnie and Dave, and finally Clyde and Dave. Now we can begin wiring these up. So I have Bonnie and Dave in the first one here, or I beg your pardon, Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie and Clyde in the first one, Bonnie and Dave, and Clyde and Dave. All done. So that's the compares taken care of. Just sort that last remark out a little bit. I think I've put something in there that I don't want. Yeah, that's okay. Just get rid of that and then make it the correct size. Great. Moving on from here, I now need 10 booles. So I'll get my first one in here. Copy these down. I'll take these 2 and copy them up there. And then just move everything down to here. So I now have 10 booles set up. The next thing I need to do is get some more remarks and label these, because these are going to be our 3-way Slither compares. So if I just copy across this one here, and this will be dead Slither between Sid, Nancy and Bonnie. Sid, Nancy and Clyde. And what I'll do here, I'll just pause, I'll do all the others, and then we'll come back and check this out. Okay, so we're just about there. This one will be Bonnie, Clyde, Dave, just to get the last one in there. Now, as before, I used a table to work out the various combinations, and once again, by the magic of technology, there she is. So from the top, we have Sid, Nancy, Bonnie, we did that one earlier, and Sid, Nancy, Clyde. Moving on, Sid, Nancy, Dave, Sid, Bonnie, Clyde, Sid, Bonnie, Dave, and Sid, Clyde, Dave. Next we come down to Nancy, Bonnie, Clyde, Nancy, Bonnie, Dave, Nancy, Clyde, Dave, and finally Bonnie, Clyde, Dave as our last scenario there. So there are our 10 combinations of 3 snakes. Next thing we have to do is start wiring our compares into the various ports. So for a start, we're looking at Sid and Nancy. Just drag a wire out of there. Sid, Nancy, and Sid, Bonnie. So that compares those 3 snakes. Then we're looking at Sid, Nancy, Clyde. So Sid, Nancy, and Sid Clyde, that's fine there. Sid, Nancy and Dave, Sid, Nancy and Dave there. Sid, Bonnie, Clyde, so drop down one, Sid, Bonnie, Sid, Clyde, Sid, Bonnie again, and Sid, Dave. Sid, Clyde, Dave, so Sid, Clyde and Sid, Dave. And then moving on from here, we have Nancy, Bonnie, Clyde, so Nancy, Bonnie, Nancy, Clyde, Nancy, Bonnie, Dave, Nancy, Bonnie, Nancy, Dave, oops, that's the one, Nancy, Dave, Nancy, Clyde, Dave, so Nancy, Clyde, and Nancy, Dave. And then finally, Bonnie, Clyde, Dave, so Bonnie, Clyde, and Bonnie, Dave. And for the moment, we don't need our last condition here, but we will a little bit later on. Okay, so that pretty much completes this part of our setup here. We're now comparing our 10 combinations of 3 snakes. The best thing to do now is perhaps to just test out each combination and see if they're actually working. So we'll plug in our result to Sid, Nancy and Bonnie, and we'll see what we get there. At the moment we're getting a 1, because of course, and in fact the eagle-eyed amongst you will have probably realised that with the 4-way slither, when I unplugged all the constants, we still got a true output here. Well, we will of course, because there are definitely 3 snakes that are equal, regardless of where you plug it in, because all 5 of them are equal at the moment. So 5 is greater than 3 and it's also greater than 4, which means we're going to get 5 equal snakes, 4 equal snakes and 3 equal snakes at the moment. But that's not a problem because of the way this is going to be set up. And you'll see that a bit later. It's exactly the same setup as we used for our position text to indicate where the snakes have come at the end of each race. So don't worry about the fact that we're getting a true output from the Boole at the moment. It won't cause any problems. What we're looking to do then is check out 3-way slithers. So if we copy ourselves another constant, we can then plug this into, I'm going to plug the bottom one into Dave there, plug this one into Clyde, and I know that I'm still going to get my 1 at the moment because I'm comparing Sid, Nancy, Bonnie, and I know that they are correct at the moment. But if we plug this top one into Bonnie, we should get a 0, and we do, because now we've only got 2 scores level. So if we take that out, we know that that's fine. So that scenario is fine. Next scenario down is Sid, Nancy and Clyde. So we need to worry about, we can still leave it in Dave, we don't want it in Clyde. We do want it in Bonnie because we're interested in Sid, Nancy and Dave. So if we plug, what have we got there? We've got, just plug this into here. Hopefully we should get a 1 as soon as I do this. If I can actually get it to plug in. That's it. So we've still got a 1. What I need to do now, plug this into Sid, and yes, we get a 0, so we know that that's working because now we've only got the 2 level scores. Now we've got the 3, so that's fine. And basically we just need to keep on doing this all the way down. So we've got Sid, Nancy and Dave. We'll do this Sid, Nancy, Dave, so we need to take that one. We're looking at Sid and Nancy, take it out of there and plug it into Clyde, and then plug it from here into Sid. Yes, that's 0. That's correct. And I've got to repeat this process all the way down. What I'll do, I'll pause here and then I'll run the checks and let you know if anything's gone wrong. Right, so I'll just make a double check on my last combination here, and it's absolutely correct. Yes, so I've checked everything now, and they are all absolutely wired correctly as I showed you. So that's perfectly good. This is where things get a little bit more complex, as I did say they would. Because the fact of the matter is, we can't just check that 3 scores are exactly the same and leave it at that when it comes to the three-way slither. Because we also have our final scenario, which of course is the two-way dead slither. Now, the two-way dead slither is actually worked out as part of this, because logically speaking, when you get to thinking about it, if you've got 3 scores which are identical, they may all be, say, 200. You might have the other 2 scores being less than those two, less than these 3 scores, but you can't assume that that's the case, can you? Because of course these could be 200, but the remaining scores could be 300. They could both be 300. So if that was the case, and you just checked for 3 scores being the same, this would trump, the way this is going to be set up, the three-way slither would actually trump the two-way slither. So if you just said, oh, are 3 scores exactly the same, and it was a case of yes, they are, then the two-way slither would be trumped no matter what, even if the 2 remaining scores were equal and they were greater than the 3 scores that you just checked. So the essential thing here is that we must compare the remaining 2 scores against the combinations of 3 scores that we've checked out here to make sure that these 3 scores are in fact greater than the 2 remaining scores. And that's our next objective. Of course, if you only had 1 score out of the 2 remaining scores that was greater than the other 3, that would lead us to say, well, there's been an overall winner in that scenario. So, that would trump everything anyway. So that's the way that all works. Our next port of call then is to analyse the 2 remaining scores, comparing them to the 3, or the combinations of 3 that we've just set up. And this is where things do get a little bit more involved. What I need to do is clear some space, and that's the first thing I'm going to do, is going to move this lot out the way. Because in order to check the 2 remaining scores against the combinations of 3, I now need another 10 booles, 1 for each of the combinations we've just set up. So let's get this underway. Get the first one. As before, I don't need to alter their functions. Every boole here is going to be an AND. What I do need though is to add an input, and then we can begin copying these until we've got our 10. So there's our first 2, 4, 8, copy the last 2 down, and we'll get our 10. And we now have them. So what we're going to do here is connect our first 3, or the output of the boole for our first 3 snakes, to the input, the input number 1 of this boole here. What I'm then going to do is bring it over here, just drop it down here so that it's closer to where I need it to be. Now, we've just said that if Sid, Nancy and Bonnie's scores are equal, then we're going to have a true result at the output stage here. If we've got that condition satisfied, the next questions that we have to ask, and we've got, as you can see, we've got 2 inputs, so we've got to ask 2 questions. We need both of these to be true. So we need to say, are the remaining scores from Clyde and Dave, and it can be from Sid, Bonnie or Nancy here. We could take these, any of these pairs of Clyde and Dave could be used here. So for convenience's sake, I'm just going to use Sid's. So I'm going to say, are these 3 scores that we've got tied greater than the remaining 2 scores, which on this occasion are from Clyde and Dave? So that's the question that I'm asking. I'm going to take that back up there. Place that in there. So that's my first question. Once again, I'm going to grab a hold and copy this remark here. And over here, I'm going to say greater than CD, question mark. So greater than Clyde and Dave. So that's the first thing I have 10 to do. So what I'm planning to do here is pause in the moment and then start to do the whole shebang and then come back and show you what I've done. So I'll pause it here, get everything wired up, and then I'll come back and explain the setup. And there we have the finished product. I've got them all wired in and I've labelled them all accordingly. Our second one here, we're comparing Sid, Nancy and Clyde. So if all three scores are level, are they also greater than Bonnie and Dave? So I've got my Boole here. As before, I've got Bonnie and Dave. I'm looking at Sid's Bonnie and Dave compares here. So I'm saying these are the compares that I'm interested in here and here. That's sorted out there. In fact, any scenario, as I say, that uses Sid, that features Sid, and that's the first 6, all of the compares I'm doing with these Booles, they're all going to Sid's compares featuring Nancy, Bonnie, Clyde and Dave. So they're all wired in as needs be. When we get down as far as Nancy, Bonnie and Clyde here, with this Boole, I'm taking the outputs from Sid and Dave from Nancy's compares for Sid and Dave, which are these two here. So they're the ones that are coming out and going into Nancy here. Similarly with the next couple of Booles here. So this is also going from Nancy's versions of Sid and Clyde. So here and here, they're going to here. When we get down to Bonnie, Clyde and Dave being greater than Sid and Nancy, I'm taking this Boole from Bonnie here because Bonnie features in this one. Sid and Nancy don't, so I'm taking it Sid and Nancy here into this Boole. That's quite important. So make sure you do the first 6 into Sid. The next 3 all go into Nancy's compares here. And then the bottom one here goes into Bonnie's. Don't need to worry about the others at the moment. Although you could, of course, use Clyde and Dave here if you wish to. You could plumb in from Clyde or Dave, but I just think it's more convenient just to keep with the first 3. It just keeps things tidier and it makes it, I think, just slightly more efficient to work that way. That's that part of it completely set up. The next thing to do is run some tests to make sure that everything's okay. What we'll do, we'll come over here, grab a hold of our result node and just test a few of these out, see what's going on. If we do the first one, just plug that in there, we're getting a 0 in there, which means we're not set up properly, and that's fine, which we're definitely not. So what we're looking for with our first scenario is whether or not we've got a draw between Sid, Nancy and Bonnie, and that the scores remaining, we're greater. These 3 are greater than the scores remaining. If we unplug or plug this into Dave here, and we plug this into Clyde, we now get a 1 in there. And if we then plug our top condition into Sid just to make doubly sure, we should get a 0, and we do. So that scenario is working correctly because we've got 3 zeros, 2 minus 1s. That's the correct scenario. So that's absolutely perfect. Go down 1. Place this in here. So we're looking at Sid, Nancy and Clyde. So Sid, Nancy, Clyde. What we need to do, leave the bottom one in Dave, plug that in there. we get a 1, so it appears to be working. Let's make doubly sure, place this one in SID so that we've got 2 the same. And absolutely, that's another scenario that's completely correct. And we'll repeat this process all the way down. What I'll do the next one, and then I'm going to pause. I'll check all the others and then report back as to whether there's been any mistakes with the wiring. We've got Sid, Nancy and Dave. So Sid, Nancy, Dave. So we need to unplug that one, plug it in there. We do get the 1. Let's double check with Sid. It should work, but we'll double check anyway. And it does, it's perfect. Okay, so I'll pause there. I'll check out the remaining 7 and then come back to you when I've done it. And we'll just complete our last scenario with Bonnie, Clyde and Dave, and that looks perfect too. So we'll just double check that. And it is indeed. Yes, every scenario is actually wired up correctly. I hadn't made any mistakes. Not a single one, I swear. No, I definitely didn't. It works out fine. The last thing we need to do here, as with our other scenarios, is to create another bool, which will be our checksum. So another bool is going to be created now with 10 inputs. If I get the bool there. We've also got to change the function, of course, on this one to OR, because we only want one of these combinations to be correct. We'll just give this some more inputs. So we need 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Make it the correct size. Put it about here somewhere. And then we can start wiring these in. Couple more to go. And we've got our checksum. So it's all nice and tidy. And of course, as before, we're going to be using the output from here to trigger the two remaining banners actually. I mean, if we get a true output here, we're going to be triggering the banner for the 3-way dead slither scenario, which will pop up out of the top of the scoreboard. If not, it will be the 2-way dead slither that's going to pop up out of the scoreboard. Because of course, if there's not been an overall winner with these here, so if we've got 3 scores level and there hasn't been an overall winner which is higher than the 3 scores, any combination of the 3 scores that are level, then that can only mean that the 2 scores left must be level with each other. They must also be level and they must also be higher than these scores, thereby giving us a 2-way dead slither scenario and a false output here. And that's exactly how that's going to work. It's all completely logical. So before I bring this tutorial to a close, let's do a quick recap on what we've done. So we'll just zoom out a little bit here, bring this down, take us out a little bit more so that we can see what we're doing. Okay. So using Sid, Nancy and Bonnie as an example, we have said if their scores are all level and their scores are greater than Clyde and Dave's scores, then we know we've got a 3-way scenario, and at this point we're going to get a positive output from here, so a true output from here, giving us a true input here, and similarly from the bool here, the checksum here, we know that we're going to get a true output for a dead slither, a 3-way dead slither. We've repeated the process all the way through with the remaining snake combinations and remaining score combinations. And that's all it is. So that golden rule, are they level, greater than the 2 remaining scores, yes or no? You can see how this is going to work. That being the case, we now have all of our scenarios to make our scoreboard work as we need it to in place. So everything here, we've got the outcome for the 5-way dead slither, we've got the 4-way, the 3 and the 2-way, and we've got the overall winner. We've got all our triggers in place and they will all do the jobs that they need to do as and when they're required to do them. And during the course of this, I really hope that you've come to see how important it is to put these remark statements in and to label everything, because just imagine how confusing it would be if we didn't bother to do that. It would drive you mad. So whenever you're doing this kind of stuff, always label everything as you go along, because it really will make your life a heck of a lot easier in the long run. I know it's a bit long-winded, but it's well worth doing. Now, moving on from here, we need to return to doing a bit of animation. And the first thing to do is create the part of the expression that connects all of this up to the banners that are going to pop up from the top of the scoreboard, and get those rising up out of there as and when they need to, by testing out these scenarios and faking some two-way, three-way, four-way, five-way scenarios, and also, of course, an overall winner scenario, which we can do using our constant nodes. So that's our next task for tutorial number 15, and I'll see you there very soon.